Good morning, Kedrutla.
Good morning, Abhilash. Can you hear me in here?
I can hear you. Yes.
Great. Let's just check the other mic. Can you hear me in this one as well?
Yes.
Okay, great. We can let people in if there's folks ready. I'll make a couple of announcements like Geshe Chekawa's event and stuff.
Sure. Give me a second.
Oh, and we're streaming. Great. And I can put our musicians on. There we go.
Sorry, the reason I didn't sit on front is that on ground is like I can't do.
Oh yes, no. Whatever's comfortable for you.
I think my legs too hard. Like I just.
Oh. Hi there, welcome everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, good, excellent. So just welcome to Geshe-la's Sunday class on the Thought Transformation and Arya Deva's 400. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get started in about 2 or 3 minutes, so grab yourself a cup of coffee or tea and make yourselves comfortable. I just wanted to... Oh, the audio is too loud. Yesterday it was too quiet. Okay, let me turn the gain down. Is that better? Is that better? Okay, yeah, it should be a little softer.
Yes.
Okay, all right. It's always interesting to try to get it just right. So just to let people know, next weekend, Geshe Chekawa will be coming. He's a very popular FPMT teacher. We have an event at the Burlington Library on the Wednesday evening. And then on the Saturday and Sunday at the Royal Botanical Gardens, he'll give a more in-depth teaching, 2 sessions per day on the Joyous Effort chapter of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. So those will also all be streamed and all be available on Facebook as well. So you can participate Zoom, Facebook, or YouTube as well. They'll be available for folks at home, folks from afar. And then we will have the first Saturday of December a presentation of Tibetan Lojong, pranayama, breathing exercises, and Lojong, yogasana, like physical yogas. So we'll roll out more information about that in the coming days, but this you have to participate live on Zoom because the teacher wants to be able to see people and their posture. So more information will be coming out about that soon. Geshe-la will also give one session of the Vajrayogini Highest Yoga Tantra teachings in December, and then on the New Year's long weekend we will have a retreat where Geshe-la will in the mornings give 3 sessions of teaching on the inseparability of Avalokiteshvara and the spiritual teacher, and this is going to be available for everyone. So thank you so much for bearing with me. I won't take any more of your time. I'll invite Geshe-la and we'll get started. So can everyone see me all right and Geshe all right? And can you hear Geshe and myself? 직승단계.
다시 될래 거기도
You hear him all
that
right?
is.
And you can hear my voice okay? All right, we are good to go in that case.
다들 그게 통데
따다리, 따다리. 예.
오야 다 지로 강가 다시 될 소소 산에 가와요 바이나에 다 강가 여보도 기고 여보요 이러요스.
So first of all, greetings to all Dharma friends, wherever you are in the world. Geshe hopes that you're all well and he hopes that you're all happy.
아니 당가로 손디니라 다루르치니 깨제셔야 되지 가세 때때 배제 도나 어다 대시 유학 잘라 조조이사 땡데 버게 다기 야기 오만다고 차그래서 마치 유아레스.
So as we gather together and we discuss these various points, it's important to have the conviction in your mind that all of the points that we are discussing, these are actually the things that we can put in place to be able to achieve that real and lasting happiness.
어땅가로서 미그 토멜라 마티베샤가 마티가 다 접어서 줘봐. 네 좀 뭐뭐 질라테네 땅가로서 잘라야 버티지 유아레스.
And we also maybe cannot perceive it directly in our eyes, but logically we can have the conviction that our opportunity to participate in the teachings now comes from great causes of virtue, great wholesome karma that we exerted ourselves to accumulate in previous lifetimes.
어다 대용터는 jet가서 jet지 말이 니 말이 접어서 줘봐. 니네 뭐라고 뭐 질라테네 다루 줘봐라테네 슈마레스.
And it's not just one positive karma or two positive causes that leads to an opportunity like this, but in fact, it is a vast collection of what is wholesome.
어다 미그 토멜라 마티비 단단한 저시고 토나 마토네 된다. 스르 넘버답이 예수 파시투고 조시 멜로 점마메베 초자 다 릴라오 마레스.
And so in terms of the kind of causes that would be behind achieving this human rebirth and being able to have contact with the teachings of the Dharma, we could say that there are three causes. The first, the principal one, is the practice of ethical conduct. The second is the enhancing practice of the 6 paramitas or perfections. And the third is the making of stainless prayers of aspiration. All of these need to be accumulated for such an opportunity.
어다 레카 셰게테고 yenda지 마레스 단단가로술 나세 대하스 아니 구조하지 요아레 어느 대도년들 세미지 요아레 소노토케 어다 디 나마지레 마도 yenda지 마레스.
And so, in terms of these causes that were accumulated, we should understand that they are not something that happens from outside, not a force beyond ourselves. In fact, these wholesome positive causes that have led to this result, these were accumulated by that we call the self or the I, and that we call the consciousness or my mind. In this way, we accumulated those causes.
어다 던지게 되는 나테도 텔라 대도년도 여기 소노토케 세니 뭐데 아니 가디이나요 다 가디이나 카타야면 가디이나 지바는 년도 요아레스.
And the other important thing to understand is that we designate as the I or the self, and that we call my mind, these travel together inseparably. They are inseparable from lifetime to lifetime.
어다 디노요 매바위 차야면 어다 던지지는 못하는 로가야 돼 손지그 지바 말에 코로 지니지레 마도.
And this journey that we posit of this I and this mind from lifetime to lifetime, it's important to understand that this is not some sort of thing that was made up by the Buddha that we have to believe in. That this journey from lifetime to lifetime is, in fact, simply the way things are, how things function.
어다 대도년들 나로술 강아 슈슈 가디이나다 뭐 레피카니 파시 요아레 대와 그거 요바도 누가 그거 매바데 가디이나 강아 슈슈 요아레.
And so from lifetime to lifetime, we're going to be faced with the same challenge or the same issue, not just ourselves, but indeed all sentient beings. And that essential issue is, I don't want to suffer, I want to reduce my suffering, and I want a happiness, I want a lasting happiness.
어텔라위터는 지세 무엇이 그요 말은 간주 관계 하고 요 뭐도 던도도 설다와 이나요. 어다 디텐도 다 바지 저되고 요아레스.
And that fact of wishing for happiness and not wanting to suffer is something that we can develop conviction in relatively easily. Because if we look at other human beings, even if we look at those in the animal realms, we can see quite naturally that they are trying to avoid suffering and achieve a greater happiness.
어다 던지그 나테도 세테니라 아니 릴라워도 말했더니 토마요메 타마요메 세요아레스.
And also, another point, and this is one that is a little bit more challenging, is that we call the self and that we call my mind. They have no beginning point, and similarly, they are said to have no end point. They are a continuum.
어다 이나용 간조 어디 잔을 달려가 야 고자에 이너리 티소 고세 템버전을 내가 지게야 돼. 대도 년도를 코아세야지 아레스. 강하게 차지.
So if that's the case, you may ask yourself the question then, why do we engage in the three trainings of hearing, contemplation, and meditation? This connects with what we say is the state of the self, or the state of the mind, which is in this state of samsara, or cyclic existence.
어달 하도 머슬다와 이나요 가제 먹이 가제 이세나요 레도 녀문이가 올지 요 사리라 어기 뭐때 뭐 매바지 코스 이거 다치 돼 아레스.
Whether we speak of human beings, whether we speak of those in the deva or the god and the demigod realms, we can say that even those more desirable rebirths within samsara, they are still rebirths that are under the control of affliction and karma.
이나요 다 대때 뭐지 레베 가디 이나 코 대게 하기네스 지레베스는 대 말레스.
So then the question may arise, well, does it always have to be like that? Does the cycle of rebirth have to continue under the power of affliction and karma? And the answer to that question would be no.
아고서라 어다 던지겠다 레도 녀문 롱메 비네스 텔러 텔리 롱을 타야지 요아레 텔 타마지 요아레스.
So this state of being compelled into rebirth through the force of karma and affliction is a state lacking freedom. However, when we engage in the practice, it is possible to reach emancipation or liberation from that situation.
어다 멀리 여보텔 거의 대화 요도 요난도 그래 요거 요아레스. 대 요비티니 다 보게 시댕이네 지게 되는 로야 다 내가 제도나 다 대소소소 계속 침보레스.
So, of course, in our human rebirth, in our human experience, those samsaric or tainted temporary happinesses, these are still things that we need. So we can still strive towards those. But Geshe-la's proposition would be that along with that, we should also be striving in establishing the causes of true peace and happiness, of liberation.
어때래 다된 대반 무지가 저 토야가 새 코로가 롱지대요 하고서라 새 코로가 롱지대요 쇼바도 니지 어떤 보게 좀보 같은 롱지지래 마도 거기 미 롱지지 말했어.
And what makes this wish possible, and indeed what makes enlightenment possible, is when we look into the true nature of the mind. And the mind is not something that is inherently negative or unwholesome. In fact, the mind is naturally connected to qualities such as love, compassion, and loving kindness. And also, even now, cognitive scientists are starting to see that the natural human condition of the mind is something connected with what is positive rather than negative. Yeah.
Pena sel shombato nijedo zeba deji kaze page sel des deba to ni wo deba ina kadi ina lelechi do shawachi tende nduwa tengan zumi 동조 아레스.
So you can investigate this for yourself. So how would you go about investigating this? You would try to bring up the minds of love, compassion, or a wholesome mental quality such as patience. And when you are focused on developing those types of qualities, you will see that the feeling of the mind, or perhaps it's better to say the state of the mind, becomes natural, becomes peaceful, becomes undisturbed. That shows that those positive qualities are actually closer to our true nature.
어다 컨트롤 소바 하고 살아봐 어다 던지게 세 여보 매비게 세 니모비 세 그게 세도 더 아니고 가제 대바이나 꼭 보게 차트가 말해 세 코로로 로지 야자니.
However, if we look at unwholesome or afflicted minds, for example, anger, we can see that no matter how long we stay in that angry state, the mind is kind of agitated. It doesn't feel natural. This shows that these afflicted states are actually not a fit for our mind. They're not a natural fit for our mind's nature.
pena nganzo dyulonda wachina ha lebi chana cheta bachi kede keba ina dewo yamaro.
So it's a little bit like if you buy a piece of clothing, like a coat or something that is way, way, way too big for you. If you walk around wearing that, it's going to be uncomfortable. There's always going to be a feeling of unease, right?
다 대노지 지하고 살아와 녀모비 세 간디지 이나 세 코로도 렘보지 요 말에 차체가 매아이자 가디나 프게 메데키지도 요아레스.
Similar is the situation with the afflictions or unwholesome states of mind. Even if we kind of stay with them for a very long time, they never fit with the mind quite properly. So when our mind is afflicted, it is in a state of unease, of discomfort.
내서 던지지 요아에서 간저 어즈잖아 박야 야 타니 was okay am
Yes. So if we understand that the afflictions are not a great fit for our mind, then we can change our behavior so that we are not always going towards the afflictions quite as much, isn't it?
좀 좋다 공부 걸어 공부 뛰어들 쉬잖아 아주 어즈지하게 알아왔어.
So, of course, the reason that we kind of feel like we're attracted to the afflictions is because of the force of habituation or familiarity, right? That's why they're strong within the mind.
단 내서 던지지 예 내서 보게 요아래 땡간도 비제세 모시에 그 요아말에서 던지지 요아이자 다 요아비가 세 대르질 저기 보게 세도 렘바 노지진 간도 다 공부시에 그 요아래.
So that's just the way of things when we look at these unwholesome and wholesome qualities and how they fit with the mind. And so based upon this knowledge, we can understand that we want to strive in developing those positive mental qualities that are the good fit for our mind or continuum.
던지지 다 알레르 마동보데 다 레레 지네 노지네 간도 다 우일 고자바인 가를 고자바이나 할레비 우 슈침보 깔레 카디 요비갈 고자지 만두시 요아레스.
So we'll begin now with a meditation to settle the body and mind, and we'll focus on the breath. So Geshe said that when you're using the breath as your object of focus in meditation, you don't want your breathing to be exaggerated. You don't need to change your breathing of how it normally is. You just need to observe the rising and falling.
pena gomja 계속 따지서 내가 코로 주샤레네라 사자질 판도는 로서 고자바이나 우에데 슈침보지가 요아이자 세대 추는 전에 야보 작은
So meditators who are experienced with the practice of the mindfulness for the breath, one of the things they'll tell you is after exertion, for example, you had to walk or maybe run a long distance. After that period of exertion, to sit down and try to focus on the breath right away, this is not advised because the breathing is labored and excited, and it's not a good basis for developing concentration.
어따구 코로그 로지 노지 간디스 탈레레 간디스 도게 요나요. 데 노지 지임비 갈때는 저는 고고츠나 아니 뭐 보게 아번도 할 배투치도.
So what this means is that when we're sort of engaged in our sort of normal level of exertion, and the breath, the inhalation and exhalation is kind of in its normal, natural state, that is the time to then sit down and use breath as the object of focus in meditation.
어따 리도 세rum바스잖아요. 달레렌데 이스.
So let us take a few moments to use this meditation to settle our body and mind.
데네 세데치 고시원다 워시네. 부추추 사고를 따와 노지 가라 샤와이나. 때문다 마도 디슈스만도 되이 섬바지.
So as we begin this meditation, let us approach any distracting thought that arises like a curious child who walks into a beautifully ornate temple. That child looks at all of the surroundings, but is not grasping at any particular thing.
Tene tende temotaki se koro ngo rongjoge sawa. Lumate ta zumatandi yabochi yo so much.
And then we pull back from just observing like entertainments, those things that are arising in the mind. And we pull in a little bit, focusing on the mind's nature, which is pure luminosity, a perfect state of neutral equanimity.
Se temanya jak tindra ane gombala tene ane ngarosu shawangude se atishigurse ta telpa yabochi ta yi so much.
Shiwa Gokten.
Huh?
So
Shawa
So we want to place our focus on this state of mind, close placement of mindfulness on the mind. And as we focus on the mind, what we want to do is bring forth the state of peace that happens from striving towards true cessation.
se koro rongjoge sawa tandi ji ya ida nyemu ba kandisile tawa ina yo tigi rongjil remandus.
And as we stated, the natural state of the mind is pure luminosity. That means any affliction or distraction that arises is merely covering the mind. It is not the mind's true nature.
Koi jala tawa ina koi kanyala tawa ina se koro lobo wa chirende mandu se koro to demondo to kedere mandu so much.
Whether we look at the result of samsara, dissatisfaction, whether we look at the causes of samsara, we see that these are not the nature of the mind. They are adventitious, which means they are covering the mind and can be removed.
Deo koi gata zawanda wate mariba kanga koro se toya koro rongjo shibi chachindu se dal.
We can also understand that ignorance, which is the very root of samsara, or the state of confused cyclic existence, is something that can be eradicated using the natural qualities of our mind.
Zawa mariba de ji shesona tela tembigta koi kangi kanga ane chabashawa no kogi yosama yasamandu teme sona tane shidengene de toya chindu so much.
If we're able to, with the power of our mind and correct understanding, uproot this ignorance, then once that ignorance has been uprooted, just like a warm rain falling on the snow, all of samsara and its difficulties are eradicated. We achieve a state of peace.
Tendigi sel shidechi tosona ane rongi teyo do toya yenji teyo pozitsuba do toya chungu ya isa ta tishul demondogi so much.
Once the state of peace is achieved within the mind, then we can truly achieve our own welfare and we can meaningfully contribute to the welfare of others.
Soma nujin jayagi tenda soha tsechi te tagayo so betone.
And so as we recite the preliminary prayers, think may I be able to achieve the state of peace as I have aspired. First page. Tembal chom den de jin je ba dra chom ba yon da bar zo be song ye re ba dang shab su demba de war je ba je den gemba ke bu du e ga lo gyorwa la na me ba la da mi nam gi tembo song ge chon den de be ja wa sha gya du ba la cha se lo che do kya zu ji o tenba chon den de ji xie ba da chon ba yon da ba zu be song ji re ba dang sha su den ba de wa xie ba ji de jian ba jie bu de we ga lo ju wa la na me ba la dong mi nong ji den ba song ji chon den de be jia wa sha jia de ba la cha se lo che de jia zu ji o den ba chon den de ji xie ba da chon ba yon da ba zu be song ge je ba dang sha su den ba de wa xie ba xi den chen ba che bu de we ga lo ju wa la na me ba la da mi nam gi den ba song ge chon den de be ja wa sha ja de wa la cha se lo che de ja su ji o. I think it's page 27 next. So the short mandala offering. So ji be gi jo shi me do dong ri ra ring ji ni So Geshe-la will lead the refuge and bodhicitta. Son ju ju dong su ju ju nam la zhong chu bar du da ni kya su ji da gi chi ji ji be su na ji zho la be ji song ji zho wa shu son ju ju dong su ju ju nam la Chonche Badu Dani Chasu Chi Dagi Chinyin Gibi Suna Jin Jola Penchi Sanje Joba Rasho Sanje Chedan Sogi Chenam Lai Chonche Badu Dani Chasu Chi Dagi Chinyin Gibi Sunam Gi Jola Penchi Sanje Joba Rasho.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
So
So as we continue with the session, think we want to have all of the parts, the beginning, the middle, and the end, in a very complete way. And so we want to be able to create the cause for both ourselves and others, not to be within samsara, a perfect cause to be free from that. And in order to reach that state beyond samsara, we need a path. We need a path that is both unmistaken and vast. So it's just like we want to perhaps visit a different country. If we want to visit a different country, we'll plan our journey carefully and know that we know the path that we have to follow there. And similarly, if we can find a way of travel that is fast and convenient, we will try to find that way of travel. So
So
as we embark on this journey, we can think of its endpoint as two worthy goals. The first of these is a worthy but limited goal of achieving liberation for oneself alone. The second of these is the vast goal, to attempt to reach full enlightenment for the sake of not just oneself, but all sentient beings. And so when we think of one who has completed this path, which we call a Buddha or an enlightened one, what does this actually mean? It means that the Buddha has completely cleared away all the faults or unwholesomenesses along with their imprints, and the Buddha has brought forth and perfected all of the positive mental qualities possible.
Another
thing that's important to understand is that the Buddha did not start out enlightened. The Buddha was initially a human being, just like you and I are.
But
he embarked and completed this journey. And when he embarked on this journey, he first identified a path that was unmistaken, as well as a path that was vast and complete. And so then this uncommon Mahayana refuge expresses this path that is both unmistaken and vast. And within this Mahayana refuge, of course, is refuge to the three jewels, underpinned with a motivation of love, compassion, and bodhicitta. And the qualities of love and compassion, right, their advantages are clear to us. They could even be clear to those in the animal realm, actually. They're evident. And then as we kind of cultivate these qualities more, we reach a refined state of love, which we know is great love, and a refined state of compassion, which we know is great compassion. And in fact, if we keep these qualities of love and compassion within our mind, what happens is that the state of the mind becomes very happy and at ease. And this means that actually we proceed along this path to our goal of enlightenment, from happiness to happiness.
오다 데이자 클로즈모 지가도 내리라고 만들어기스.
So then, in order to embark upon that path, we will just take a moment to set our motivation.
리트는 짜르는 리트는 다 세칸가 레레셔와야래 소마치.
When the body posture is upright, then the chakras or the energy channels are upright. When the chakras and energy channels are upright, the prana or the wind can flow freely.
대운때는 레청 아메리카리나 세야버티고 생진요소 주바 다니에자 체수지인바 따차와레스.
So think that we have seen that one of the most beneficial minds is this mind that sees all sentient beings as connected with and close to us and views them as precious. So bring forth this mind towards sentient beings.
다리가스 바바다 디 가디 템바다 야보 지코자기 선바지.
I think I will recollect the kindness that all these various sentient beings have shown me in the past.
rumba tombo텔라 센디게 소소니 자침보티다 가리 야보 지템바지.
If you want to sort of develop that feeling gradually, you can think of just one example of the person who has shown you the most kindness and concern in this lifetime. It will be a bit lower because I'm speaking lower for the meditation, so I'll try to speak louder, but not in an unmeditative way. Let's see if I can manage that.
파카리 체바이는 팔다와 마카리 체바이는 말다와 다 대도 대지마다 가리 체슈가르이나 디게도 뭐가리 되고요.
So think of that being who has shown you the most kindness or concern. Perhaps it's your mother, perhaps it's your father, or another person who took care of you. Contemplate their kindness.
데네 세제 현도 설다와 이나요. 뭐젠델 거로 메가 마통아 존재래 마도 나 세대 다시 왕마 요나 파마 요나 니자 체수 오다 할래야 같은 그게 나로 소시 된다. 로버지요레스.
And then think of this I and this self that has traveled from lifetime to lifetime in the past. And develop this awareness that any number of sentient beings were perhaps connected to us in those previous lifetimes, were our father or our mother or somebody who showed us great kindness and care. In this way, it is possible that all beings have at one time or another shown us great kindness.
마로서 말이 비고 안에 마통아래 마도 소소 더 안에서요 던도이나요 다 던디치니까지 지까지 지어 말해서 되네 라토요.
The veil of ignorance blocks our vision being able to perceive these relationships. But logically, we know that there's no being we could point to in this world, human, animal, or so forth, that we could say that that being has never shown us kindness or concern.
젠데 지벌을 찾아잖아요. 사야 뒤야 아니 뇌로 가르 이나요. 뭐 무시바 자다 몸버지 제시발라 때는 쉰디 선바지.
And if we think about it even from the perspective of just this lifetime alone, the clothes that we wear, the house where we dwell, the food and drink that we use to sustain ourselves, all of these are available to us only because of the kindness of others, most of whom we've never met.
노난 로아리투 센체스 요소 주바데다 까리 체주 기반다고 다 까리 체나 어다 자치수 어떤 게 까리 체모래도 선바지.
So with this awareness, we build the mindset that any being of the 6 types of beings within samsara is close to us, has in the past shown us care and concern. None of them is far away from us.
다리 멀리 여보 매 레바 여보 어단 ndriga te za chi mo de la pa jelesi wi de se de 선바지.
And so think, when I have this human rebirth along with this human mind and intelligence, now is the perfect basis to work towards repaying that kindness.
리주용 주 강에 제도 지바다 메와서야 다 손지 고마마도 다 만두 대토바서위 손백톤이 쇼지세.
I must repay the kindness in the ultimate way by removing the suffering and causes of suffering of all 6 types of beings within samsara. In my current state, I don't have that capacity, so I must first achieve the state of complete Buddhahood in order to lead all beings to freedom from suffering. Meditate on bodhicitta.
로아리 주용 주고 덕보게 들레게 된다 다 레카시도 야보슈소 선바지.
Think, in this way I've been able to establish the cause to benefit all 6 types of beings within samsara. Today I have done something worthwhile and feel a feeling of joy. 다 디디치 던디치래 서 당연히 다 던디치나 가서 릴라보고 돈이 로아리 주고 들어버게 리줄라 템비가 다 디바 몸보지 봐 단도가 요아래 어게츠 몸보지 지사 용거를 계속 심어래. So actually, when we meditate in this way, it's something that is supremely powerful, because by meditating to benefit all of these sentient beings, we can purify the negativities that we may have accumulated on the basis of one or another sentient beings. Similarly, by meditating in this way, numberless sentient beings act as the basis for our accumulation of a merit that is vast, that is exponential.
손지 코로 자 체주 기투에 샤리부도 뭔가 버세리 다 코로도 가디히는 년도 이렇게 대지 까오면 보더니 아니 다 버게 겨와드발에 손지 세민 다 디세 튠두지가 겨와드바트 배지 그랬수 말했어.
So it is said that even those great Shravaka, those great hearer disciples of the Buddha, including the ones who are with him all of the time, for example, Shariputra and Modgalyayana, that the merits that they collected over many, many years did not equal the merits of the Bodhisattva, who with this intention does something positive even for a short period of time.
다 대지야 템바 존에더니 오게 와서 알 버게 가보도 갈레메바 쳐야지 된대 요아레스.
So when we recollect this, when we are mindful of this, the practice of engaging, of accumulating virtue will become something joyful, something that makes us happy.
다 소노 또야도 때지 제는 리라고 되네. 당연히 로얄 콜리라고 매아이자 단디는 말씀인 거야.
So to think about achieving this state and benefiting all beings, it's easy to kind of maybe think about or feel that we want to do, but in terms of actualizing that state of enlightenment, that's a little bit more complicated, and for that reason, we will turn to our discussion of the text, which is Geshe Chekawa's commentary on the 7-point mind training.
시고 돈바소고 순기야래 다 관계 갖고 살아와. 아니 누구 셰베 깔라 니모 콜레가 시키 매아이자 아니 템보나 보지 와르 되니 저 전에 보게 누구 많이 비깔 따져서 가레스. 여본 로근도 로근도
And so, in terms of us kind of self-evaluating how our practice of mind training is going, the time to evaluate it is not when we're like in placement meditation, in single-pointed concentration. The time to evaluate our practice of mind training is when we're outside the meditation session, engaging in our regular activities.
다 녀다서 키 매비 깔 던더스 이나이 고 잔도 가와 끼고 신이 되던데요.
If kind of sitting silently and relatively concentrated was kind of the measure, then like there'd be lots of animals that look like they're already enlightened, because lots of animals can sort of sit silently, right?
그 약간 되게 좀 어떻게 되was.
Yeah.
샤르지 들릴 쇼갱하고 고야 보자긴 되was.
Yeah, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says the pigeons outside his hotel in Delhi are meditating very well because they are staying quiet and undisturbed.
다저 아주 고 잡이 깔 소노 또야 돼. 그게 바제 제비 깔다 코로 베제 또 도고도 도고 뭐 요래. 바제 제비 깔라.
Yeah, so the time to really check how our practice of Lojong or mind training is going is when we're encountering difficulties or something upsets us. Then is the time to see if we are really practicing mind training.
어떤 아주 집어 말이다스. 놀래체 도월이 안 나요. 어찌전에 군도 봉사자. 지전에 대처 봉사자 손비 손슬레비 깔아요. 드니전 다치서 요아레스.
So it is said that the great meditators, when they reach a state where they think, oh, perhaps I have been able to abandon anger or aversion, to really test that feeling about their meditation practice, they then go out amongst the people to check if that is really the case.
텐디바지 다 가서 사전에만 로이스 다 텐디가 다 단계 소마 노지 정지 세트 슈체는 도야게 된다.
Yeah. So we will then turn to our discussion of the text and really have the sort of motivation that our discussion of the text here is to kind of bolster this intention of bodhicitta that we initially developed.
다 돈수 찌르고 눈에 다 돈수 주니바
I love the Tama Dangtanya Buddhism.
야야 다 미진 돈수 찌르요. 그래서
Yeah, Chutrugyerewa in the Ganso Kawa made the Angjang Datashi.
yeah.
So we are towards the end of the 16 commitments, the 16
돈수
damsi
찌지바서 인가.
of mind training. Ngadi lagime Ganso Kawa Chichita.
그래서 내라 뭐봐. 밑에 말라 찌지바더와.
Nula miba. Ale. So Geshe believes, I'm not so sure, but he believes this is number 11. Don't strike at a vulnerable point. Don't strike at a vulnerable point.
된도 첨보지 매나. 하고서
Yep.
어떤 생질 내가 첨보도 다 드니 보게 여다 첨보지 매나. 뭐서도 설이나요. 추바도 드니 가리나 콜시 주여야 말이에요.
So one of the things that this is saying about a vulnerable point is that unless we have a very altruistic purpose, we should not be in the habit of pointing out the faults of other people or of other groups.
야 보게 리도 셀 내비가 다 보게 내서 좋아지 못하는 요나. 뭐 주바 뭐 먹지를 걸 내바시나 코시원 내로 요아이자 어때 마소스.
Because we understand that sometimes even if it is an accurate observation, if we strike at a sensitivity, if we strike at a vulnerability, we could upset a person, or if it's an organization, we could upset a large number of people. So this is something that the Bodhisattva practitioner wants to avoid.
다용 생질 내바 첨보도 드니가 내서 좋아 첨보 요바이는 오 주비지를 인지민지 팔 시보소 그 아래스.
However, if there is an organization that is harming many beings, that is causing great suffering, that same sort of altruistic intention actually compels us to say something measured, but to say something.
다 때문에 미지세하 고근도 와 손지의 치고 용조 된 이지 자와지이자 설리나 있어도 내바시 미와만 와스.
And we can understand also that in terms of the Buddha's teachings, all of the Buddha's utterances or words were spoken from a place of great compassion. So there is nothing within the Buddha's teachings that could harm.
빼나 간조 gem바 첨보도 다 생야 보게 자갈이 이나요. 가와 이나요. 무지를 보게 여다 침무지 요나 시 침무지 요나 하고서 덤보 론소 코로 추지了 코로 샤를 요나 너를 여바라고 저도 또 요래
Geku dirwa. I'm sorry, something popped up. Is there still a problem with the sound? Okay, good. Sound is getting in my head. All right. So Geshe said that one of the ways to practice this, you can see from the behavior at the monasteries. So if there is a particular monk who has engaged in some behavior that is bad, the Geku, the discipline master, will make a general pronouncement about that particular bad behavior, facing no direction in particular. In other words, not singling a person out. So it said if that person is sitting towards the eastern half of the assembly, that the discipline master will gaze towards the western half of the Sangha. And if the person is intelligent and introspective, the person who committed the fault, even though the Geku is not looking at them, they'll know that the admonishment is actually for their sake, that they were the one who made the mistake. Yep. Neighbor. Yeah. However, if the person isn't introspective and doesn't get it, the discipline master next time will sort of walk to the general neighborhood of where that person is sitting, but maybe not standing directly behind that particular monk. And the Geku will make a similar admonishment. And if that second approach doesn't work, then the third time, naming the person and pointing them out in particular, the discipline master will make the admonishment. So we can understand, that as a practical application of this advice to not strike a vulnerable point. Right. So Geshe is just reading the commentary under the slogan, do not act in a way that causes pain to the minds of others, such as by exposing people's hidden faults, so we talked about that one, or reciting the life force mantras of non-human beings. Konda di ngakden so kyoria kandes nugire konso. Right. Yeah, so these are mantras that are said to they're like spells that sort of maybe subdue in a harmful way other beings. So that can also be another understanding of not striking at a vulnerable point. Yeah, So Geshe said that these kind of harmful mantras were said to be able to harness the power of certain beings, for example, the Nagas. And so a practitioner of these mantras would sort of say this to harness that power, but it would also harm those Naga beings. And he or she, it was said that where they walk, that the grass could turn into a golden color, right? There will be these kind of like seemingly good things that would happen. It is said that through the recitation of these mantras that were like seizing the supernatural force of the Naga beings, for example, that some mantra practitioners could, if there was too much snow falling on the mountain in one's own village, one could, pointing one's finger, shift the snow to the mountain of the other village. So His Holiness often recollects the great story of Lord Milarepa, right? And we know that Lord Milarepa, he was very skilled at these kind of negative incantations. And he said actually that Milarepa, because of being too close, too much respect for his mother, when she wanted him to recite these spells to get revenge on the family members, he did that, right? And that, of course, was the accumulation of a great negative karma.
된디스 단 조카 주니바
Yeah.
조카 롱라 만조 시바나 롤라 바비 주카 롱코 녜녜 롱로 광에 요지고네 예라 조와 콩 시제지 시바 대다바 봉하고
So then, I'm just saying to Geshe, he's still not wearing the glasses I got for him because the print is very small. So we are at the next
미식
one.
말다 걸어 미식 여보지다 대전으로 봤어요. 이제 뒤녀도
He said, Geshe said he doesn't need the glasses. I'm just looking for the opportunity to drop a hint to all of you how great I am because I got him a pair of glasses. Okay. He's just kidding. So we are on number 12. Don't transfer the ox's burden to the cow. So the commentary. And we're on page 15 midway down. Sorry, I didn't give you the page number. So avoid the negative behavior of deviously transferring to others any responsibility or blame that is rightly yours.
다 선제기 때인데 선제를 빼자고 야래. 선조도 요아도 드는 봐주셔야 되니 배를 뭐 야래.
So here it's using the animals as an illustration, right? An ox or a cow. So if you were Tibetan, you might use the example of like a yak or a zu.
다 된다 빼리라 워셔 시자바 이는 롱보체가 잘라 커터야지. 아니 봐주 춘주지라 봐주라.
Yep.
So
the example that's often given in the scriptures to illustrate this point is if we have a load that is supposed to be carried by an elephant, it would be unfair to transfer that load to a cow or to an ox. It would be too great a burden. So it's not suitable, right? Because of course the ox does not possess equal strength to that elephant, right? So it would be a great kind of injustice to transfer an elephant's burden to an ox. So what this is supposed to illustrate is that if we have made a mistake, if we have done something that is incorrect, and we transfer the responsibility of fixing that mistake to someone else, or we transfer the responsibility of making the apology to someone else, then that is unsuitable. That is like taking the ox's burden and placing it on the cow. And if we are a practitioner of the Buddha Dharma, right, we know that such behavior is directly in contravention with the law of karma, with the understanding of cause and effect. And actually, even amongst worldly people, somebody who's not able to own up to their mistakes and kind of absolves themselves of responsibility or gives it to someone else, that person is not seen as particularly ethical, are they? Yeah, so actually, whether the fault is a small one or whether it is a major one, to transfer the responsibility of fixing that to someone else is unsuitable. So the next one, don't misperform the rites. So Geshe thinks this is 13. Don't misperform the rites. To take on others' defeat out of a wish for one's own ultimate happiness, or to train the mind in order to pacify demons, harmful influences, and sickness, is just like practicing a mundane rite in order to avert misfortune. So I know some people who are listening to us, you're listening in different countries, maybe you don't have English as your first language. A rite means a ritual. When it's spelled R-I-T-E, rite means a ritual. So Geshe said to take others' defeat out of a wish for one's own ultimate happiness. So one understanding of this could be if because of covetousness, we are trying to secure possessions for ourselves that somebody else has more of a right to. So this would be one example.
하고서라와 다 니를 공화이는 니가 소소소소 도그래 마도 소소 집어 도고 말아왔어.
Yeah, and also if you are sharing a possession with someone else, you have to make sure that that person gets their fair share of the resources, right? That you're not trying to get some kind of unfair advantage for yourself.
자가 시작이 잘라 이는 실은 공화이다 소소 집어 그다 그냥 나보지 않는 거 말아왔어.
Yeah, so if something also is meant for a community, if you are sort of monopolizing it and using it for yourself, that is also something that is very unsuitable.
요지째 마테 가디나 세트 딩걸 소노 동안 대세.
So don't think like that. Ale, don't be competitive. Sorry, this is don't be competitive. Sorry, don't be competitive. That's number 13. My apologies. I misled you. So don't be competitive. So that also means not to acquire the possessions of others. I'm sorry, I lost my place. Oh,
리스윙.
loso jiso. Oh.
야, 다 지지 바로와.
Yeah, so now we are don't
so
misperform the
yeah,
rights. Yeah, Geshe said you got the slogans reversed. I did. I'm sorry, it was on another page. So don't misperform the rights. We're there now. Oh.
또 또로 마샤시바나 퓨 롱송완 데네 예라 포칼렘바도. 이제 데놈 내셔완데 로종완나 또네 또 지돈다이 롱데 봉와 샤고.
So we are on don't misperform the rights. To take on others' defeat out of a wish for one's own ultimate happiness, or to train the mind in order to pacify demons, harmful influences, and sickness, is just like practicing a mundane rite in order to avert misfortune.
다 대침보 요아르 주시 요아르 된다 소설 계속 야보진대니라 계속 라야게 되는데 예르파 니바 당기 된다 원다고 요아르자도.
So Geshe said this is a bit similar to that point about mantras, right? It's engaging in a specific ritual to achieve an advantage, resources for yourself, often at someone else's expense, right? So this is a misuse of those esoteric practices.
소소 같더니 버게 다 그냥 내도 더니 마메바 차야게 되는데 세제전달 내바시 한다고 다 더니 마시.
So for example, there's some kinds of black magic, right? Where if we're experiencing a serious illness, we can recite a ritual and that illness is transferred to someone else. Of course, this is something very negative that one should not do.
다 대지 강가로 롱진즈는 되와요. 이제 간주 단다 로주시 대한테 롱진즈서 내반 좋아요. 잘라시와.
Yeah. So, in fact, we can understand this in a very broad way that when we are performing a rite connected with self-cherishing, primarily connected with seeking our own advantage, this is against the precepts of a practitioner of mind training, because self-cherishing is actually what we're supposed to be working at eliminating.
다 친요 또 진는데 롱데 봉사지 용도와 롱데 도소인.
Yep. So we want to kind of mind training that involves a partial attitude is mentioned in the commentary here, right? So a partial attitude means really thinking of ourself first. So we want to set that attitude aside. Really important.
다 내는 가미요 같이 벌써 남는데 지대야지라 노지나 아니 제와도 내쳐서 돼야 돼. 먼저와도 인 제야가 차니 개체식이 알았어. 노지나
제라 테네스나?
내쳐 이는 얘도 공세를 하바지 손도야.
야야. 데네 닝제?
다 알도 뭐 내쳐서나.
야.
오케바 가시가 체마가 놀라 데려면 됐어.
알레.
내쳐서나.
로스.
제와도 내쳐도 되대요는 소속은 대와도 되와.
Okay, yeah. So Geshe is explaining this word dechak in Tibetan, which is attachment, and how it can be used in different ways. So for those of you who are familiar with the teaching, you know that attachment is often defined as seeing an attractive object and exaggerating its qualities so that one wants to possess it. But Geshe said that another understanding of attachment can be 공다 닝제디 연결로당.
제와된 내쳐도 점문데스 대야데 롱데도 데도 요메 또 디찬에
This attachment, the word can be used as a way to investigate our compassion. If our compassion is mixed with attachment, in other words, if the compassion is unsuitable, that means that that compassion has been brought forth mainly for achieving our own aim, mainly for self-concern. So that's attachment as something that is mixed in with that compassion and unsuitable.
하고서를 어따때 뭐 채하셔도 이해도 공을 하바 손으로 또야지 유모모노를 텐데 시작을 왔어.
Yeah, yeah.
이나 채마가 논을 텐데 시작을 만들었어.
Ya voy como son dientes.
세시오스 내자세나 유모모노라
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
가디나 이해도 공을 하바 손으로
Vale,
또야지
dos. So in most of the scriptures, actually, we'll see that attachment is really explained as exaggerating the qualities of something that we find attractive, beautiful, or handsome. But we understand that also attachment can be used in a different way to talk about a taint, for example, within our compassion that is self-serving, that is primarily aimed at our own advantage. Dijung karenangla?
로베 쇼노이나 대행대 시작하면 됐어. 단다들 온게 로데든 데도 요매 뒤쪽에 깨지시는 있어.
And so this explanation of the word attachment in connection with that tainted compassion, this is Dharmakirti's explanation. So you will find that in the treatise on valid cognition and so forth by Dharmakirti.
빼나 다때 바카시 오잖아. 빼나 소소 빼나 뻐근다고 지나. 뻐기들 파제와 요바지 아지바지. 다 뻐기들 파가제 요바지 바이는데 마고바나 치킹알 치로바지 그래 손선다고 지요나 루데돈다. 대자던데 송하네.
So Geshe wants to give an example of this compassion tainted by attachment to sort of elucidate this point by Dharmakirti. A good example is a parent with their child. So of course, as a parent, you have a natural compassion and concern for your child and that you want them to be happy. However, we could say that that compassion is tainted if we show concern to our child thinking in the future or when I get old, that child is going to be able to repay the kindness and to take care of me. That's an example of tainted compassion. I see Geshe-la's face is maybe not so visible to people at home, so I'm going to turn on a light so you can see more clearly. Excuse me. That should be better. Sorry about that. The sun went away suddenly.
그래서 다 권이제 걸어면서 여보 차거래 손비톤에 걸어 여보 제야지나.
Yeah.
다 대손서 로이나. 야로 전도 만드나 로데도 만데와 이사자왕기 야쇼들에.
So when we have a spontaneous compassion that thinks, gosh, I really wish that person was free from suffering and the causes of suffering. I really wish I could do something about that. And it's not tainted with some sort of self-interest, like because he or she could repay me later. Then that is that compassion which is untainted by that fetter of attachment.
매매땡이 같이 보시가 대개바 첨버지가 오다 대오네서 야 첨버지.
So Geshe wanted to explain, right, different ways of seeing and understanding these words according to the great panditas like Dharmakirti.
시도도 노징아조 내셔던 데이거든요. 다 대화한데 저는 오다더니 계정 뭐시고 요아래 스코하던 데도 말이야.
And you'll see that when we talk about compassion, right, we use this word tainted often, right? We talk about happiness tainted with happiness tainted with attachment, right? We talk about giving tainted with attachment. So this is a principle that can be carried over.
오다 대배가 와잖아 지바라와 세제제는 뭐시바도 뭐시바 가리 이나요 그러보게. 아니 저와 이내가 돈이 다 이내가 돈이 번도건데 내자던 데도 뭔데 대다지서 신거로 왔어.
So this will help us also to monitor our own behavior, right? When we are doing something nice for somebody else, when that person is a person who is known to us or close to us, or perhaps a person who we don't know, but we're just motivated to somehow try and help them. Now we know, right, how to check whether there is that attachment operating in the background, and that can make the compassion more powerful. We can refine it.
어딘데 봤지? 그래서 오다 체지게 노도라 체체체지게 노도라 로종다 내들라 펜베 타지의 고완다데 대 주시나 배셰바도 체메 지샤와 녀모바도 노도게 녀몬도와시 기바 예수.
So Geshe is continuing with the explanation underneath don't misperform the rites. We must avoid such selfish concerns. Mind training that involves a partial attitude and which is understood as a beneficial method for dealing with demons and harmful influences is no different from a shamanic ritual. To qualify as dharma, it must function as an antidote to the mental afflictions and to worldly or ordinary thoughts.
다 대오년가 뭐요아래 생각도 샤테도 가르서 기기나 단다 이나 샤테 뭐 주고 요아르면 레치기샤와 뭐 지고 요아르텐 저 무슨 디가 never do yak the mo shu chi wo chin ro yo res.
And this is a real piece of advice because we see this in the world right now, right? Often if we sponsor or maybe even if we participate in a puja, we'll have some sort of goal in mind that we want that puja to contribute to our prosperity, to contribute to being able to achieve something we're seeking to achieve, right? And if that's the only motivation, then that means that it's not functioning as dharma, right? Because that's a very worldly sort of attitude.
Ta ti chin ro yo do me te cha chi ya bo chin ro me ba ta che ba re na wo chi su ya re.
And so Geshe said, no matter how beautiful the ritual is performed, right, whether it becomes a practice of the Dharma or not is connected with that motivation, right? So if it's the motivation just for this life, okay, perhaps it's Dharma if it's something positive for someone else, but it's just for this life means it's not thoroughly a Dharma practice.
Ta song ji ge chi xie da nga zo te chi xie se da chi te ta bi chi. Ta bi chi xie ba la zo te le ne ba shi ge ne mo yi za ne wo le ne ne ge ya res.
So we have to understand this in the broader context of the Buddha's Dharma. The Buddha's Dharma is known as the Dharma or the teaching of liberation. That means that if we are practicing the Buddha's Dharma, it must be practiced for the sake of liberation. That is the true measure of practice.
Oh ya ta chong ba la de de ma ba ji ba nan ji de ba kan je rong ge lam mang ge ni ro la ne ba shi na la de de ba se wa ta lo ju ge ne nga ja do lo se chen bo shi na chi chi se chi mo de song wa yi lo ju ge ru jin de gi ba yan ba la ani nga ja ji ru ji la ba de na chi ne de ma so de sha gon ne ba la lu no go she wa don da te sa.
So the next one, we're on the page, I believe for you guys, it's bottom of page 15. Don't reduce gods to demons. Worldly people, when their own gods are displeased and cause them harm, say that the god has been reduced to a demon. Like that, if the practice of mind training leads, now we're on page 16, to an increase in pride and arrogance, the Dharma has become non-Dharma. Mind training must discipline one's character. If one's character only becomes puffed up with pride, the Dharma's failed to hit home. This is like performing a ransom ritual at the western door when a demon is causing trouble at the eastern door. The medicine needs to be applied directly to the site of the illness. Let us abandon self-cherishing and act as the most humble servant of all.
Ta nga ro so tene ji ya ta ji te bila te de ya te ka ji te ki yo was ron de ba ko ro ka khala te chi zo ki te yo was te zo de ya te ko ro pe bi ten le ka ji yo res.
So this is a kind of indirectly critiquing the practice of relying on worldly deities, right? Even sometimes those amongst practitioners will rely on worldly deities. And the reason that the worldly deities are relied upon is most often to seek some sort of temporary advantage for oneself, isn't it?
Ta la jo ji ne se chun ji la te ne ne ba zo ya te yo res.
And so Geshe said that those kind of very mundane, the most mundane worldly deities, you can get them to do you a favor by accomplishing an aim for a seemingly cheap price at the beginning. They're easily bought off, in other words.
Ta te la de pa ba sa cha so res yo res pe.
And so when you rely on some sort of deity like that, with that motivation, that deity in effect becomes a demon, right? Because the long-term result isn't going to be something good for you.
Ta nga ro so lo ju she chi lo ju zo nyon le zo ge yo se ne ta te nga ja che ren do ya to nyu mu shu che ren do ya ge jal do so na ani te du ji ba chwa se res.
Similarly, we can understand the god as being like a metaphor for our study and practice of the Dharma. If we study and practice the Dharma and our knowledge becomes more advanced, and because that we become prideful or we will look down on others, right, then that is like turning the Dharma into a demon. In other words, it's not reducing our faults, it could be increasing our faults. So that's very important.
Ta te ji kmi ta te ya te do wa te yo ara was pe na nga yo le ba ina za za ma che na to mo ne tu ma ni de te so no ha le pi ta bo ma to na yo da za mari ba shu chen do te bo cha ga nga yo ara.
And Geshe would especially advise those of you who are practicing the methods of Vajrayana, of secret mantra, that if you are not beginning with the preliminaries of the meditation upon emptiness, then, for example, engaging in the practices of the mandala and so forth, without that emptiness underpinning them, they can actually reify the ignorance grasping at the self rather than confront it.
어다 초가 관계 드다 관계 가는 거주 그러는 tumani 저 수자케
So whatever sadhana you are practicing, whatever deity you are focusing on, if you are not, when it says Om Sobhawa Shuddha Sawa Dharma Sobhawa Shuddha, everything becomes emptiness, you really have to pay attention to contemplating that emptiness.
어당마 녀랭아 저다 송지 수만 누진 저도 말로 저 디네시데 타데 퍼서줘봐 시라 퍼서줘봐 이와시가라 마도 연도 뭐뭐지 봐요 알다서
So when we're practicing the sadhana, when we're practicing a deity method, we have to have this kind of introspection of, am I really accumulating method and wisdom in the context of this practice? And Geshe said that that's not something to anybody in particular. This is something that all of us who practice these sadhanas need to be mindful of.
디나 메 네토데 동시 다 진즈 뽕라사 그라 텐제 타마타 샤고스
So now we come to the next slogan, Kigi Yenlak du Matsu.
나 테크놀로지 데스고 다 저르바 시제야라도 두 마소 시바나 롱게 녜도도 조치라 소바 샤나 대다게 시노도 빼잘라 소바 나라용 예도라 나사시체 쉬나 추수용 로도 뇽비 고체샤나 나치발라 그세용 다샤나 내제 마요 나
Don't seek others' misery as crutches for your own happiness. Avoid wishing that others suffer as a means to your own happiness. Do not think, for example, if my close relative or friend were to die, I would get their food, wealth, books, and so on. If my patron were to fall sick and die, I would have the chance to accumulate merit. If my meditator colleague were to die, I would have the chance to accumulate merit by myself. And if my enemy were to die, I would no longer be harmed and would have a chance to thrive. Avoid thinking like that.
다 대징대지가 할래비서 하시 머리에 왔어. 원리라고 말해서 와서 소소를 계속 지도 다 여보지 유하게 대한다. 예를프게 강해요. 되는 손으로도 할래비다 저거자고.
So in a capsule, really, what is this pointing to? It's pointing to thinking that we are worthy to receive some sort of advantage or some sort of benefit that comes at the expense of somebody else. That's one thing, right? So the other person, they will come to difficulty, but it will benefit us.
다 디체텔라 한번 거시키면 와서 다 델시나 뭐요. 다 디체텔라 도지 쩌르데레스.
So Geshe said, in fact, the commentary elucidating this final point, don't seek others' misery as crutches for your own happiness. He thinks the commentary is quite clear and self-evident. So in this way, we have completed the 16 samayas, the 16 commitments section of this commentary on the mind training.
어다 뭐절은 로또 로마노 손선마노 어다 그때 비도본도야기 텐데 다 시워주줄 수 있는 와서 어다 대지 용을 딱 그 아래서 간죠.
These slogans are so beautiful because they outline for us an unmistaken path to follow, an unmistaken way to kind of think and approach things. They're really something that can be relied upon.
어다 대지 간 것도 어떤 야 때모유하게 된다 다 롱좀 매봐 뚱만이도 저같이 뭐야 해서 알 대세만도 있어.
And for us to be able to get the maximum benefit of these practices, we also need to understand that things do not exist from their own side, that they are not inherently existent. And so to help develop that understanding, we will turn to our next text. So we are on chapter 13 of Aryadeva's 400 stanzas.
다 슐로카 리송아
Shloka Sukni Bashi.
선바 들어와.
Sumba Kederebe.
가테 주통 가 다시 된로 마소. 가테 주통 와이 대 토제 통한 전나는 마통와이 주통 통한만 바지면 저스.
So we're on verse 303. If because the form is seen, everything is seen, why, because of what is not seen, would the form not be unseen?
어떤 데데 깨체셔서 강가 로로고 쪼쪼 코로스로 길레 가리요 아리스 그네 로지지 요는 요 그거 요는 로지지 요 그거래 론지제 매나 맨도 그래 사트 코로스 따와디요 하래.
So Geshe said he wants to share with you the reason for these verses being spoken here. It's really important to understand the context. These are answers to a debate. It's people objecting that if you say things exist, then they actually have to always be existing and always there. If you say that things don't exist, it must be the case that there is nothing at all, right? So these verses are aimed at correcting such misunderstandings.
단데 코로 째와도 마순 요노로고요. 이제 가시치 그냥 거대 보시라요 말 때는 또 짜와 단데 대하고 그래 하랬어.
So Geshe said that because these are answers, this text is in fact answers to questions from very clever debate opponents. The answers can sometimes be cryptic. So as we investigate a text like this, it's important to understand what it's refuting in sort of the larger picture.
가테 주통와이 대변나 범만다고 지통와이나 하고서라 아니 가정간조 범비노로 추반노로 아니 드지제 잘라제 초디와레스
잘라제
사자메 류도 아니 저로 레자도 강가 초디와라와스 강가 통도 그래 잘라바이나스.
So Geshe said, remember what we talked about last time with the vase or the pot. When you see the vase or the pot, do you see it all kind of as one component? Do you see the fire, the earth, the other elements that went into constructing the pot, as well as the liquid or the nectar contained within that pot or that vase, part of that pot or vase?
갈레자 노원데서와 다 드네 되는 네스지 마통하지 요아이자 아니 자소 마통하자라 가르스.
Well, if the pot is all of these things together, then, for example, if you don't see the nectar that is inside the pot, you don't see the pot at all, because the pot must necessarily be all of these things together. So it's refuting that mistaken view.
어떠니 pomba통마스세한테 단적 주사매 봐 좋아하는데.
And if you break it down to its parts and its elements, you'll see that saying I saw the pot, I didn't see the pot, I was able to pinpoint the truly existent pot, this becomes something that is not easy to say at all.
다게 뭐 그래봐. 어딘디와지 주는 바시 코나라 좋아. 주는 바시 코나라 녀선이네 요마이 공셔텔라 바로지 차도 서로 라위 차도 서로 이해셔.
304, there is no direct perception of just the form alone, because it has a close and distant as well as a central part.
다 pomba 따이니까 녀서티 pomba 지비 pombi 주이 지보다 같이 통하지 통그래 자더니 라바이나스.
So if you're saying that, okay, I perceive the vase, and that when I say I perceive the vase, I really see that vase because that vase is its form. So to perceive the form is to perceive the vase.
던디 pomba 주이 지보지 로지 저바치 통하여 말레스.
Ale, 가르치네.
pombi 주이 지보 로지 저바치 통하여 말레스.
If you just look at it like that, just kind of saying the pot is its form, it will be difficult to see how the pot is not truly existent or how it lacks inherent existence.
하고서라와서 그 던디 pom바세한테 누두대 코로 차시 뭐지라 때네지 잡아. 차시 뭐지라 때네지 저바지래마도 코로 지보지 버게 로지 유하 말레스.
We have to look beyond that initial kind of sight perception, direct perception of just the form, and see that, in fact, yes, the pot may appear to have this solid form, but if we break it down, this seemingly solid form is actually coming together of many different parts, constituents, or elements.
리스윙 알레디 디지 because 릴라보치로 다 계자 뭐요 알지도.
So Geshe said that's an easy way to understand this verse. Of course, there's more that we can do, but we also want to move ahead.
당가봐 더라 차시에 예매지 제바대 용주반지 디시 더바샤와이 드잔더바 마테도사.
305. This also applies when one examines whether particles have parts or not. Thus, to prove a thesis by that which must be proved is not feasible.
다다 같이 먹게 제시바에는 빼나 pomba 코로 로지지야 바텔 제바시나요 저거 주사라야 문디스 당길라사송스.
Yeah. So Geshe said that from the previous verse, right, we understand that the pot is just not that solid unitary form, because if we try to break that down, there's no pinpointable pot, right? It's a coming together of many parts.
다 대노지 뒷노니 더 레레라요 때문에 그건 저것은 다 제체바이나 대용으로 때문에 로지 저 뒷노니 도야지만 돼.
And so if you were to go even beyond the examination of the pot's components, for example, the clay, the water that came together to make it, and you were to even identify its particles and say, okay, I'm going to find the true pot particle within this pot, and that is what is truly existent, you would not be able to find anything pinpointable at all.
다 던지지 매바 이타 단디 대 도도 제바이나 디셔 더바샤와 드자도 드제사 저것은 문제 있잖아.
And so if you understand that also those particles have those particles have parts, and so they are further broken down, you also see that there is less and less of a chance of pinpointability, and so then one comes to an understanding.
디스와 단디스 다 던지지래 다 뒤는 가 첨보 때라 된다 간저 림보도 뒤뒤 첨보도 주시 야가도 누가 가르 이나 찌찌라 떼내 잡아 주저래 마도 고로 로지 집은 저거 수자지 가발 따와 있는 거야.
So as we look through these verses, what is the awareness that we should have behind our investigation of the text? That no matter whether it is good or bad, no matter whether it is big or small, whatever thing or phenomena that arises, if we try to pinpoint self-existence, inherent existence within it, we will find that there is nothing pinpointable at all.
단 드릴라 때는 가서 가 첨보지를 가라 하고 그러잖아. 빼나가로서 지마켈 지마.
Yep.
지마켈 따위 가라 노아야라 때는 셴바 매바. 하고 살아. 오늘 누제니까 여봐. 누제니까 매바. 서 가 첨보지가 써요. 대지회 하고는 여봐요.
So another analogy that's often given to illustrate this point is the analogy of the illusionist, of the magician. And there's different people that are going to see the apparition, right? The appearance that the magician is creating. Some will just see the appearance but not grasp at it as being truly existent. Others will both perceive the appearance of that magical apparition as well as cling to it.
어떤 가로수를 쪼개야 돼 가르 로지 매바데 셀프게 사보지 차야게 된다. 알레텔 그룹게 내서 뭐 먹은디 왔어.
And so in order for us who are approaching the teachings to understand what it means to say that things lack natural or true existence, these various analogies, such as the conjurer, such as the illusionist or magician, are given.
어떤 가로수를 로지 집에 놓아요. 다 셴바요메 다 놀로도 세 놀로도 셴바요. 왔어. 니스도 칸에 로지 집에 와래 세요 말인 가서.
So even though, and this helps us to break down our experience, so even though we might be expressing from our mouths that things lack inherent or true existence, we also know that when we perceive something, it comes together with an appearance of being truly existent. And if we're honest with ourselves, when we look at our mind, we'll see that within the mind, there is a clinging or a grasping to that true existence.
빼나지 마케가 그게 때문에 때는 도도 시도 때니 lumbo체도 때니 노아서는 그치 노아서나.
Yep.
하고 살아. 코롤 아니 노아조 요아마도 셴바디 요 말이스.
The magician, when he or she is casting the spell and an elephant is appearing, or a rabbit is coming out of the hat, and so forth, they're seeing the appearance of the elephant or the rabbit, but they are not clinging at it as being truly existent because they created it. So they know it is an apparition, an illusion.
어다 릴라 알코데 워시는 뚜마니를 초와 첨보도 다시 워샤소나. 어다 노아도 노서 메토고 말했더니 다시 안 받으면 로요.
So, as we investigate these teachings on emptiness, how do we see if we've made some progress, if we have had some success? Well, the first step is the appearance of true existence may arise together with any phenomena, but we are not grasping at that appearance. We are not clinging at that appearance of true existence. This is the first step for emptiness meditators.
다 던지질래서나 다 노아도 요 이산 대초가 노아 콘도가 노아 뭐 용거 요 할때는 이나 디그 퍼 셴바데 마 이제 내가 시토요 말이야.
And so we know that together with that appearance of true existence of any object, part of the problem is that it feeds into the other afflictions like attachment and aversion. But what we'll find is if through our practice of investigating emptiness, we have been able to reduce our clinging, our grasping at that appearance of true existence, then the anger, the attachment, and so forth that arise to various objects, these will also be greatly reduced. So that's another way to gauge progress.
대이자 저마케 거로고 따도 너무 진행해진 것서 그 사기에서 조금만
So it would just be kind of like we have that knowledge and things don't kind of upset us or affect us in the same way. Just like the magician, he or she is not going to get scared by the illusion of the elephant that they created, right? Because they know that there's nothing real to grasp at behind it.
다 그게 때문이지나 키네서 다 고매해서 노아도 셴바니까 요하이서 다 고사게서 뭐 요하레스.
An ordinary being who hasn't been able to investigate the teachings on emptiness, he or she never has that opportunity because they don't even question the appearance of true existence that arises together with objects, much less do they question their clinging or their grasping at that true appearance.
어디서와 어때 누지레스 어디서와 다 현지에서 파파스 알레서는 노아도 셴바니까 매소이자 다 되니 된다 강에 공용 내가 유용해요 말이스.
So we know that in terms of if we think about this from the progression of the path, once the bodhisattva has achieved the path of seeing and becomes an arya, or a superior bodhisattva, not only are they not only is there no longer an appearance of inherent existence that arises together with the objects, of course, if there's not even that appearance, there won't be that clinging either. So things become so much easier after that point.
어떤에서 던질다와 있는 다 도만ing에서도 또서는 다 계속 쳐버려 다 기원년에 된 것주 말에 세한테 이제 강가 되는데 왔어.
So when we think about it, especially from the perspective of achieving aspects of the path, we'll see that this direct realization of emptiness is something that is so immeasurably helpful and beneficial. And this will encourage us, right, to continuously engage with this difficult topic.
다도 카드도 요 말에 될 베이가스 송 덴지가스 서트 반로시기 전에 가제트 다시 하느냐로 어떤데 어때문디 왔어.
And so as we go through these texts, also very helpful to think by way of example. So what is the example that has been given in this verse? And what is the meaning that is elucidated by this particular example? So if you tie the examples or the metaphor to the meaning, it'll be easier to decode.
노아요라 셴바메바. 노제니가 요바 노제니가 메바.
Yeah. So with this magician or illusionist metaphor or example, we see that it's illustrating for the magician, the appearance may be coming, but there is not the there's no appearance of true existence because they know it is an apparition. For some within the audience, there may be the appearance of true existence, but no grasping at it. And for others, they may have the appearance of true existence as well as grasp at it.
다테 바디다 와자바이네 라마존카바다 다 개바체 워지 아마고 놀테지 되지 좀
And so if you want to investigate this illusionist or magician metaphor even more, you can look to that scholar who is greatly praised as the most preeminent pandita by Lama Tsongkhapa, the works of Chandrakirti. So in this way, Geshe said, he said that there were some difficult points. Hopefully these were clarified a little bit. So we will conclude the teaching on the text there. So we're going to dedicate our merits in a nice way. If after the dedication you need to get on with your day, please feel free. If you'd like to stay with us for question and answer, you are most welcome. So just wait for the dedication to come up. I think it's page 29, but I'm not sure. Jiangzhu Senju Rinpoche Maje Banam Chejur Ji Jeba Nyamba Meba Yang Gone Gonda Bewa Resho Toni Tawa Rinpoche Maje Banam Chejur Ji Jeba Nyamba Meba Yang Gone Gonda Bewa Resho Jambe Pao Jidar Kempa Tang Kundu Zangbo Deyan Dejin De Deda Kungi Jesu Dalo Chi Gewa Deda Tamche Radungo Dizun Shebe Gyawa Tamche Gi Ngowa Gangla Chodo Ngaba De Dagi Gewe Tsawa Dikun Kyong Zambo Jeji Radu Ngowa Gi.
로지 관계 개인이 발랐대네 다 뭐게 뭐지 내요 다 okazi yobaine kanga pakoi kanga shawaji.
Through the powers of the merits that myself and others have accumulated, may all of the problems pulsing through this world of war, of famine, of disease be completely cleared away.
인소서 조시비 코이네 다차 종아파 조마차네 다 대화 정시로.
May, through the force of these merits, all the abodes within samsara become completely purified, and may they come to possess qualities like Sukhavati, the land of great bliss, the Western Pure Land.
너는 소소 롱기 답이 생지 유주기질 som바 시와 달래가시 토야기질 도와줘.
May I, myself, through the force of these merits, become capable of influencing the beings I encounter to bring forth minds of loving kindness. So we'll take questions. Perhaps I'll just turn up the volume a little bit. Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask?
I have
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
question, and Dinah has a question as well. Go ahead, Dinah.
Oh, thank you. Mine's a quick one. I just wanted to clarify what did you mean earlier when you were talking about worldly gods and deities, and how you can't get a quick fix by asking for help? The reason I ask is because in Theravada we didn't have the understanding of bodhisattvas or like Tara or worldly gods or whatever. So I'm getting a bit confused as to what you mean by them.
Oh, so you want to know
The same, like the
what
worldly
qualifies as a worldly god? Are you asking if
Yeah.
Tara does? No, Tara is a fully enlightened Buddha.
Okay.
아?
Yeah, no, so Tara is a fully enlightened being, right? She's not a worldly god.
Okay, so what do you mean? Sorry, I interrupted you. Go on.
No worries. No, I just got to get the question to
다
Geshe.
손지 노지도 주고요. 아래 손지도 지발했어.
So Geshe said that when you view Tara, you can view her with equal faith and confidence as the Buddha. She's enlightened just like the Buddha is.
Okay, so
You can rely on her without any doubt. She's not worldly at all.
so what did you mean by a worldly god then? Because I guess I'm a little bit new to Tara and all the other deities, right? Because in Theravada we just have the Buddha and that's it.
Yeah, konso neten tekpa di rwa tomba chomdende matok yomare rwa sangye dang jangshu sembaden so dramen natok yomare rwa dene jigtempe la sena kareres jigtempe la kandes yewa chego.
다 니데빌라 간디스요 셰게세나 니데빌라 간디스요 셰게세나 다 모두 지바라 요 셰도 지바레스 동반잉에서도 도요도메.
So we identify a worldly god. One way to do this is to see that if that god is like a human being, for example, they haven't realized emptiness. if they don't have a direct realization of emptiness, they are mundane. They are not super mundane.
니티 대바이나 니티 이나요 고 둘로토요메 또 좋다야레스다.
And even from the Theravada perspective, right, the Theravada also has 5 paths. And so a being who has not achieved the path of seeing, right, he or she is not yet an Arya or superior being. They are still have an aspect of being mundane.
니티가 니까라 니티도 로자니까라 테메니까세 너그러죠.
Yeah.
테티니까라요 아니 데바도 지텔린티바 니까요아레.
Yes, yeah.
존재 셈바리나 지바르니까요아레스.
So the interesting thing here is that, let's take it from the Theravada perspective. So those Shravakas, right, those hearers, or those Pratyeka Buddhas, those solitary realizers, they also have these 5 paths. And before the path of seeing, although they're exalted beings, they're still considered worldly. It's only after that path of seeing that they are considered supramundane, Arya or superior beings. The same is true of bodhisattvas. Before the bodhisattva, before he or she reaches this path of seeing, they are not yet an Arya bodhisattva, right? So they are still, by that measure, a worldly being.
니데바도 지텔린티바 소소시오도 봐봐 이거래 된다.
Yeah. So in fact, when we talk about worldly and transworldly, or mundane and supramundane gods or beings, essentially we're talking about the difference between ordinary beings and Aryas. Aryas meaning those who have had this direct understanding of emptiness.
다 델리카시르 된다. 된다. 니넬은 로기는 또 많이 시원해서도 또도마도.
Yeah, so really what we're talking about, what the final measure is of when a being goes from worldly to supramundane or to beyond worldly, it's that direct realization of emptiness that makes the difference.
돈번에 존재세만 로게지는 솔로마도 졸로메니까래 로강가 니데비 로레스기아레스.
So even those bodhisattvas who are on the first 2 of the 5 paths, the paths of accumulation and preparation, until they reach that path of seeing and become an Arya, they are still technically worldly.
그래서 다 돈을 내서는 지텔린티바 좋아서.
Once they reach that path of seeing, that direct realization of emptiness, then they become supramundane, beyond the world.
때 가르치는 야바일레스는 단기 동반이 녀서도 또 요하르테는 녀서도 또 요하마 다 대슈 체르 쓰고 차내는 녀서도 또 소와스.
So what happens is it's really the direct realization of emptiness that makes all the difference. So those worldly bodhisattvas, right, they still might be quite powerful, but they don't yet transcend that worldly state until they have that direct realization of emptiness.
사베 메이치바노지 거의 그 내서때 레 녀바 간거
Because that direct realization of emptiness is said to be like a powerful fire that burns the seeds of karma. Even heavy negative seeds are no longer able to bring forth a result.
왔다 제만 노는 요아레 거의 타마데 가디레스는 동반이 녀서도 또 그래 다 사베 메이치바노지 고치 바레스.
So in fact, this is talked about in the Pramanavataka, the treatise on valid cognition. They ask, when is there an end to samsara? There is an end to samsara where all of the seeds of karma have been burned and are unable to bring forth a result, just as in a great fire.
야, 못 와서.
So sorry, long answer to your question, Donna, but hopefully.
Helpful. I apologize if it was a silly question.
In fact, I don't think it's a silly question at all, because I know that like in the Theravada tradition and in other, traditions of Buddhism, they're not always familiar, these beings.
간조 간가 깨져서 노노 가디 와서 소나.
Yeah.
이때는 디바 쳐서래.
Ale, konchuk sumla?
깨져서 노노 가딘 로서나. 간조 쓰이나.
So Geshe said also we can apply this to ourselves. We become supramundane. We become beyond the world when we actualize the 3 jewels within our own mind.
메스가 말이다. 깨져서 노노 요한로 소나.
Yeah. When we become the 3 jewels ourselves. I see a lot of... Oh, you're very welcome, Donna. I see a lot of hands, so I'm not sure what order people popped up in.
I think Yolisa was out. Well, she came to.
Sorry, Yolisa. Go ahead, Yolisa. Yep.
Hi there. Last week, I wanted to talk a little bit about last week. You talked a little bit about dissatisfaction last week. And I was very interested in this concept because I think dissatisfaction is something that is something littered in my life a lot. And I wanted to know the different or how dissatisfaction relates to self-grasping and also emptiness. How does it relate?
Gotcha. Okay, yep. Nganso di chokshi mepe gi semdi rwa duntra ngema nganso di chokshi mena dene nyotra dramandra yongire duas ko mo mitse gi nangrola di dempares dapochi hako tsarsuwa rwa dene nganso di chokshi mepa gi semdi kandes mepa sogres di chikche ane chokshi mepa gi semdi nganso di tangzin ma rigpa dangjewa kandes chikures tuadire.
다 조시 매비게 세세나 조시 매비 세세나 빼나 소소 롱진즈 가제 슈체가 이나 잘라 뭐게 가제 뭐 가제 여바 이나요 내가 거야요 말 왔어.
So let's first pinpoint kind of how this dissatisfied mind can be measured or how it can arise. So in this way, we first talk about it as how it relates to self-cherishing. So the stronger our self-cherishing is, the more likely we are to continue to experience a feeling of dissatisfaction, no matter how many worldly things, how much success, how much respect we experience.
하고 서래 다 디잘로로 단자 말이 바땡이에서 아버지 마토네라 그렇게 로바서 왔어.
And so operating behind that dissatisfaction is that self-cherishing, and operating behind that self-cherishing is also the ignorance grasping at the self. So they're all interrelated.
다 가르세가르 달리라고도 말아왔어. 빼나 또 첨부지이나 다 조심해나 가디이나 코 슈퍼차요 말했어.
Yeah. So we know that, for example, those who possess great wealth, because of dissatisfaction, because of this lack of contentment, right? No matter how much wealth they possess, they never have the feeling that they're rich. They never have that feeling.
또 그것도 제조를 잡아도 되지 되네. 이나요 조심해야지. 그 가디이는 내가 거야 매야이자. 가디이는 거 쪼어래.
So the person could be like a king, a business person, like a movie star, whatever, who has amassed great wealth, but because they don't have that feeling of contentment, no matter how much they amass, there's never going to be that feeling of like, okay, that's enough. I'm good now. That's not going to happen.
다 쪼어지이나 코 할래야 든지 잠만 뭐야 말이 다 너그래 선바시온 가디이나 코 기보시네 대토야기도 원내서 지금 그 알아요.
Whereas there may be a poor person who has this mind of contentment, right? The opposite to that lack of contentment or dissatisfaction, who has that mind of contentment, and even though they have very few material possessions, because of their attitude of like, I'm fine, it's good, it's enough, they don't experience that difficulty.
그래서 엄마 또 첨부지서 걸어서 다니서 때 쪼어지어서 봐. 되는 와지 다 잡고 또 첨부되어서가 다 자가이나 별이나 하면고. 어디 다 로바서 하긴 내가 첨부주는 할래비 내서 차치 뭐 쪼어될 때 말했어. 니 맞지라?
Yeah, 하고선.
제일 다 쪼어돼서 terasa 이자 다 노지 쪼어러 와. 할래비 끼고요 알아 와.
Yeah.
다 잘라 뭐 디세질 터져고 절래서 이자 니마 같이 전이 그거야 말이야.
And so actually there's a famous story. So Geshe is not sure if the setting is ancient India or old Tibet. It's one of the two. So there was a very wealthy family that lived nearby some very poor people living in a hut. And one day, kind of inspired by the spirit of generosity, they decided like, we have so much and those people are so poor. So like we should give them something. But the thing is, the poor people, they had this attitude of contentment, and they were satisfied with what little they had. As soon as the wealthy people gave them all of these things, immediately that dissatisfaction started to appear. They started worrying about where they would put it, how they would keep it, how they would prevent it being damaged.
니마 가시게 지금 차소 치커거니 더니 뭐또 첨부될 시제게들 파트 봐요.
So in fact, they were kind of so disturbed by this that after a few days, they just decided, we're giving everything back to those people. And they took all of the things back to the wealthy house.
가르치는 시제 저기 선데 저런 때는 내가 니야 저렇게
Yeah. And so then the wealthy people asked, like, how dare you return a gift, right? Like, that's so rude. And they said, because of your gift, we started losing out on sleep. So it just was not worth it.
How do we develop contentment? How does one develop contentment?
족시 간데스 기에고사.
주시 세팅이 단다들이 요나 주시 좋아야래 매나 주시 좋아야래 시도 주시 요래잖아.
It's an attitude essentially of acceptance, of being able to accept I have this and that's all right, and also being able to accept that I didn't get this and
매나
that's all
주시서
right.
어떻게 하지 말다. 사야도 뒤에도 요가로 와서 시도.
Yeah. So I mean, like, it's not completely abandoning all the objects that lead to satisfaction. We need to eat and drink, right? Like there's so yeah. Be realistic.
이나 다 된다. 문유 가를 마티빙아 다 닌드근 sombe 좋아지요 그 요래스.
Essentially, this contentment or satisfaction is just this feeling of it's enough. I have enough, and it is good enough. It's just like that.
하고서래. 잘라지 요는 어떤 늘면도 데려와 가지고 근데 데려와 가지고 근데 드니 조조사 또 정말 보면 봐 뒤창이야.
Being satisfied with what one has and not in this constant kind of like repetitive mind of thinking I need to get something better, I need to get something newer, and so forth.
하고서로 컬러지인도 대가를 와 가지고 근데
Or thinking my neighbor or this other person has this, I need it too, right? Abandoning that kind of covetousness.
다 드니지 와이서 가만 자가를 드니 라마 짜심버서나 뭐도 짜심버지가 코로 기투에 텔 잘라 야버지 코로 라바 이사로 왔어. 단데 루만들 조쇼 텔 때쇼스.
So you'll remember the story, right, of the lama who had some kind of like very beautiful thing and he decided to give it away. And he told his attendant, you should give it to the poorest person in the land.
아니 요버티가 달라 누르와 조쇼 텔 쓸적이요나서 니마카지 냐된도 왔어.
And his attendant like was kind of perplexed by the instruction. He's like, how to identify who the poorest person in the land is, right? That's kind of hard.
어느 니마치 기텔 다 쓸잘라 쓸적거래 달라비칼 다 코로 라마티 두버렌도 와 자보테. 어때 자보테 면전 텔 때쇼스.
So then he eventually went and said to his teacher, like, I didn't get what the instruction is. Can you just like tell me who I'm supposed to give it to? And the lama, being a friend of the king, he actually said, you need to give this thing to the king.
당그마 자갈 잡었지 말다 잡아 먹어야 알아. 왔어. 다 마치 유지 잡었지.
Yeah, so this is a time, of course, in ancient India where India was not yet kind of like a unified country, right? It was a bunch of small sort of princely states, I guess you could just you could
다
describe.
로징이네르다 가서 좀 말했어.
And so, yeah, this is a story from history.
아니 기트 데컨원 했더니 잡았을 때는 내가 아니 라미가 루반도는 쪼쇼들 때서 생겼어. 내가 가지냐 다 저럴 때서 생겼어.
So then the attendant, being sort of obedient, brought the gift to the king. And then the king said, well, why are you giving this? And he said that, well, the lama instructed me to give it to the poorest person in the land. And he said that that person was you.
아니 잡어도 손은 뭐또 쟤는 로마데 냐마치 코케서 제가 질레인데 와서
And the king's mind was terribly disturbed. So he sought out the lama and then basically asked him, like, why did you give me this?
더니 라미데시 잡아랬어. 루반도는 잘라 먹을 저를 모아야 말했어. 이나 셀 쪼가 저를 쪼가지 뭔데.
And the lama told him that there is nobody in this region who has more material possessions than you. But similarly, there is nobody in this region who is more dissatisfied, who thinks that they don't have enough to the greater extent of
다
you.
된다 조시세나 되레스 요난다 매나다 단딘 저거도 저거도 소바지 요나 뒤서 저 배도 지모지 요아레스.
So that's that satisfied mind, that mind of contentment that thinks that whenever one has, even if it's just the basics to sustain oneself, that that's okay, that that is enough.
마토시 또 거의 체레스 단 저거 세대한테 거의 단 리아메바데 거의 체 저기 알 노지나마소.
Korwise karejabi.
저거도 선 토아체메바데.
Yeah.
거의 체.
Yeah.
안데 저거 저거
In fact, some lamas say that this is the measure of being in samsara. It's the constant mind of dissatisfaction, thinking this isn't enough, this isn't enough. That's a way to know that you're still in samsara, if you're still experiencing it.
이나 가로서 뒤눈이 다 끼어 고알도도 요아르테네 뒤눈이 끼워 줘야지 짜그러 왔어.
So we ourselves, we're samsarians, we are samsaric beings, right? We're still in samsara, but by shifting our way of thinking with these kind of tools, we can reduce that feeling of dissatisfaction. So we do have a visitor today, and he had a question. So I'll take his question, then I'll come back.
Thank you very much. That was great.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So I have a question about emptiness. So as what I understand, emptiness is like nothing is external and everything is based on the arising of others, right? But if I understand it correctly, there's one school in the Theravada. It's called Sarvasvadian.
Yep.
They think there's actually particles like that actually exist based on their abdama.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
and,
yes.
I think they kind of contradict each other because I also read the books by the founder of the Emptiness School. It's called Longshu. It's called
Nagarjuna?
yeah, Nagarjuna.
Yeah.
And he criticized Sarvasvadian for that view. But I just wonder how to cope with this different views on the emptiness for the different schools among different schools.
So could people at home hear the question? No. Okay. So I better say it again. So the question is about emptiness, and so the question began with this understanding of that emptiness, that nothing is kind of external, that everything is arising from other factors. But then within the Shravakayana, right, within the schools of individual liberation. So one of these is the Theravada, but the question is not about the Theravada. It's about another school called the Sarvastivada. In the Sarvastivada, their Abhidharma teachings say that there are actually particles or atoms that do exactly exist, right? That do exist from their own side, right? And so, but then he was reading that Nagarjuna, right, was criticizing this Sarvastivadin assumption that these particles truly exist. So how does one understand these differing views? Is that the question? Okay. Yeah. Then also the Tompani senarwa chik korong chikpo dagas drubeyo marerwa chatsangwa gyendagla tene chungi yores matok ine korong chena drupta mawa gi nanglola rwa tek megi drupta mawa chik konso chena konso zögi nanglola kandes agre tela chungshidi kandes trugre true
the
duntre
chamo.
chik duntre chamo rangshingi duntre chamo chik yores utugyagi duas ine gompo lundrup di konso dela tene kunje chegiyores dene di korla kandes samlo tangores ane tawa mindrawa dinso yupadi kandes hakogores.
매미 따따와 먼저 여바테도 걸어서 따따지 뭐뭐 저는 손지게 단다 먼저 뭐뭐 지수 말아 소소 데마트 봐요. 소소 데마트 봐매. 베자 가시노라.
So Geshe said that it's important to have the overview of how this happened, right? Because these are all Buddhist philosophical schools. So why did these different understandings arise? That's because of different things that the Buddha said in different sutras, according to particular disciples. So some sutras, he seemed to indicate that there was some aspect of true existence, and in other sutras, he seemed to be saying that there was nothing that truly exists at all.
아니 손지 구자가 더 해봐 때때 게임보래 때는 구자가 더 요새 계제사가 너 가시요.
And so within the vast kind of corpus of the Buddha's teachings, it's very rare, but you will find certain instances where in a sutra it actually seems to say that there's a self of persons, not just atoms, but that there's some kind of inherently existent person. Yeah.
대슬 계제시바래서는 구자가 더 요새 대한테 더 싫어 봐요 봐지 구자가 더 소화 첨보요 봐지.
So
누가 싸봐.
you may ask yourself, why would Lord Buddha say this? And the answer is that these sutras were from the beginning of his dispensation, of his teaching. And he was speaking to people who were not yet Buddhists, right? Who were following other Indian philosophical schools. So to kind of create an affinity with them, he would begin by seeming to indicate that there was some sort of self of persons.
다 된도 나워레스. 변하시라 마마도 너대봐도 다 되는 사람 뭐뭐 요하러 왔어. 어다로 데마트 봐 요하래. 오 루지지 봐 요하래. 어다 대지 걸어서 소화 첨보지 요하이자. 네가 지라 롱서 대지 요 말선 콘솔 페도메가 좋아하는 요하래.
So similarly, in the Sarvastivada school, or indeed in other of the Shravakayana philosophical schools, the schools connected to that goal of individual liberation, they would have a teaching that says that there is some element of true or inherent existence. So why is that the case? It's because the Buddha's teachings were perfectly timed for where the person was at that time. And when he was speaking those particular sutras, the Buddha knew that the minds of those particular people were inclined to still grasp at some element of inherent existence.
수지 라장으로 요 덤보 초와 소소 가리체가 요는 된 요래서는 된 로슈스.
And in fact, the Buddha's view is that one begins with where one's own affinity and capacity is at that moment and practices from that point and then develops gradually to something beyond. So the philosophy reflects that.
다 다르데 누지레 더 참모 드니지 매너도 체네드는 저거 주사 매너 근데 손은 컨트롤 강에 되어 아이자 드니지 데 맞다 요 아래.
So with the Sarvastivadins, Geshe said he's not sure, but he could posit that they think that even if you break things down to their parts, eventually you have to break something down small enough that when it comes to the atom or when it comes to that particle, there has to be something pinpointable and existent. And knowing that it would be too uncomfortable to refute that right away, the Buddha gave a provisional teaching that seems to confirm that.
빼나 조 대뇨다 데레스. 세대아데 구조아데.
Yep. And so why would they sort of need that provisional teaching? Because they would say, okay, this I or this self, this is designated on the basis of the aggregates. So there has to be something pinpointable within those aggregates, even if it's very small, just like a particle. Otherwise, if there's nothing pinpointable, then the self could not exist at all, right? They would have this kind of very strong idea.
가시가 분봉가 추바들에 세한다고 가시가 분봉가 들에 세한다고 다 ngama이나 다 쪼쪼데 루지발레고 세게 눈에 이제 넘바시바들레스.
So also this unfolds a different conversation, which is how the self or the person is designated within the different philosophical schools. So some were saying that it is posited on the basis of the 5 aggregates, and then when you come to sort of the higher philosophical schools, the Madhyamika Sautantrikas, for example, are saying that it can't be pinpointed within the aggregates, but there is a self that can be pinpointed within the subtle consciousness, within the subtle mind.
다세 좀비고 코로코로 따지 뭐뭐 전에 다가지 이제 넘바시바서나 시치 뭐지 연구 데이자 다 끝이 노시사지라 그거들.
The Chittamantrans, right, the mind-only school, they are saying that, okay, it's not pinpointable within the mind, but if we say that there's nothing there at all, then that will negate the person. That will negate the I completely, right? There'll be nothing there. So it has to be somewhere. So it's located in the Kunji Namshi, the Alaya Vijnana consciousness, or the mind basis of all, that there must be something pinpointable there.
다 누가 집어라요 데서 뭐라고 뭐 치시면 바래. 다니 다 누가 마이kin 놀라 ngmani 따지 뭐 전에 다 가시가 따빠. 롱와 끼고와 드리지 알아서 아주
So within Buddhism, there's various understandings. And then when we go to the philosophical schools beyond Buddhism, they were often positing a self that was permanent, independent, unchanging, existing from its own side, right? They were accepting that.
이나요 따오면도 뭐 여바된 간조 매도다라고 손도 그려야레스.
But Geshe said that understanding these different views can help our understanding. So we can understand them as, although they are not the final best flower, they are still beautiful flowers within the garden, which can help us cultivate our understanding. And we can also appreciate beyond Buddhism all religions, not from the perspective of the view perhaps, but from the perspective of conduct, because all of them have teachings that try to make their followers more loving, more compassionate individuals. Those who are following those paths correctly. Of course, we can always point to followers of one religion or another who don't do that. And in fact, in some philosophical scriptures, it is said that these Indian philosophical schools refuting Buddhism, that these were actually propounded by an emanation of a Buddha, so that the Buddha would be able to later clarify them. So we need challenging opinions to be able to build our wisdom and improve. So perhaps those challenging opinions, those differing philosophies were propounded by an emanation of the Buddha. It's possible, right?
달리 해야 진도야 레바야 진도야 뭐지 주고야 대주로서
We need something that challenges our convictions to really develop that breakthrough in understanding, right? That's really important.
다 가져도 다 깨져 뭔지 소마스 다 다왕이네 다 가져도 칸이 님 보셔야 될 맞아 다왕이네 라켓에 게 몰라도 다 걸어서가 다 로지 매비가 나와대 다 두디 되시기 알았어.
So, but we understand, right, that as we go from that philosophical school, Geshe wants you to know where he's coming from. And he said, of course, he hasn't realized this. He can say the words maybe nicely from his mouth, but he's not claiming he's realized this. But he has confidence in the view of emptiness, the Prasangika school, as explained by Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti.
Oh, yeah, Jesus, yeah.
So I see some more hands. So shall we go to the other questions? I'm not sure who is first, so just go ahead.
I think Matthew is first. Yep.
Go ahead, Matthew. Yep.
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for today. Earlier, we were doing a short meditation on the breath. I'm quite kind of new to my practice, and trying to learn to meditate and to do this. And often places you're reading, they say, the first step is to develop that breath meditation, or I think I'm going to say this incorrectly, but samatha. And then in other places, like where we're reading in the 7 points, it says, to try and work on that area where you need the most work first. So in some sense, I think maybe I should be doing metta. And of course, then the mind goes and wants to jump around and things. And in any case, where you read, it always says, find someone to teach you, find a teacher of meditation. I'm not sure where my question is, somewhere in there. But how would Geshe or you recommend progressing, from a place of, you have a sort of amateur meditation practice where you're not entirely convinced you're doing it properly, if that's the case, and kind of moving along step by step.
Sure, Matthew. Yep. Chiwa di re roa di ngazo go to do roa de ngazo ula tene gomjabya chiki res tene dela tene ngazo di shini droya tapchi chegi res tingi jinla tapchi chegi res roa yine lojong gi mengak nanglola roa ngazo di tambo ngazo nyumong shuk chesha karires tane dene so di me paso go gire duas ane le tamboa yena roa dene jung dramandra di ke chambores di sogores nganso tambo ne kandes gomgi nyamlen di kandes gochegores ane yang di deb mambochik roa nganso yang kandes lagare gomjaya gi gegen dapochik tsegores di kandes chikragires gidu
매매 다 세례를 자야라서 또 뭐야. 저 윤중한테 우주간에 시자지 다 레레서야 대 같이 못 지서요.
So in terms of the meditation on the breath, to give context of why we are practicing this, we are practicing this to still the mind and prepare it for the rest of the session. And this can be done, for example, by developing enough concentration to count to 21 with the breath.
다 디존한 저거래 니시자지 존한 저거래 다 된지 제바시라요 말했어.
But Geshe said even 7 points for a beginning stage, 7 points of focused attention on the breath is really good. So if you can focus to 7, then that may be enough to go on to the next topic.
다 레빈노도 뭐도 좋아도 저 뭐 슈트하고 이는 다 중에 가리나 공연소는 뭐도는 원래래야 대지전한 저거래.
But sometimes when the mind is agitated or when we're stressed about something, the breath can actually be a trigger to make us feel even more unsettled. So in that case, what we could do is set aside the breath and just try to empty the mind of thoughts. In other words, try to relax away the thoughts as a first step.
다 일라 마셔 봐대 다 니가도 패도 때 요시게 요arte 때 디세리 원데는 원 고야보요 말했어.
But we need to understand the limitations here, because emptying the mind of thoughts is very useful for establishing that first kind of foundation of relaxation. But if we never go beyond that, we won't be really developing our mind. And in fact, we could even fall into dullness.
소진 좀 멀리 요비갈 멋지게 치지 니 지라는 지템바신 도야 지라는 지템바신 줘야지 고용이 아티세리월
Yeah. So Geshe said, yeah, we sometimes if we only practice that, we can actually dull the mind. In fact, it reminded him of the story of Chuda Pantaka. Some of you may be familiar with the story of Chuda Pantaka. Remember that it was the monk who, like, he had to memorize a 2-line verse. When he memorized the second line, he'd forget the first line, and then when he went back to the first line, he would forget the second line, right? So dullness is not necessarily something good.
매미 다때 같이 뭐지 이다 디소이나 좀 멀리 찌위라 마셔 봤대 다 고잔데 걔때 뭐 요하세 요하세.
And so Geshe thought to clarify this here because there's a lot of, in the secular presentation of meditation, there's a lot of misunderstanding that meditation is just so that we can stop thinking and so that we can relax. But if you never go beyond that, you're not really going to get the full richness of meditation.
다때 지셔 ngamatel 찌위라 마셔 고 취체다네라.
So it was said actually in the story of Chuda Pantaka that dullness had actually come from a previous lifetime where he thought that meditation means I just have to empty my mind of thoughts completely and not do anything at all. And then he became dull in that life. So for people who are just beginning on the path, Geshe would say, yes, very good to start with this anapanasati, this awareness of the breath, and perhaps counting to 7 if you can manage, to 21. And then as the preliminary for your meditation session, whichever figure you feel a connection to, it could be the Buddha, it could be Tara. You try to visualize them clearly in the space in front of you, and then you can imagine receiving blessings of lights and nectar. And so this is just related to this idea of shamatha, which you mentioned, this idea of single-pointed concentration. So generally, actually, any object that we focus on single-pointedly can help us develop shamatha. But in the Tibetan Buddhist presentation, it's better to have a virtuous object, which is why, for example, the Buddha or perhaps Tara would be recommended. And so what we do is we visualize that image of the holy being, and then we know that distracting thoughts and unpleasant feelings are going to arise as we meditate, and we just allow them to arise and without grasping to fall away again. That's the first step to developing that shamatha. So you'll want to investigate these teachings on shine or calm abiding, which is kind of like the ultimate expression of shamatha and single-pointed concentration. There's different levels of calm abiding. It's said that we've gone from the first to the second when we can go through a whole rosary of remaining on our object without losing focus. Yeah. But in terms of how to, as a beginner approaching this on the path, how to contextualize this, Geshe would recommend first we understand that this meditation on the breath is very useful for refining our concentration and establishing a mind that is calm, not agitated, right? But then we want to go beyond that so we can develop our focus with the visualization like he recommended. But it's important to understand that the concentration that we're developing is so that we can really meditate effectively on these important positive mental qualities that we're trying to develop, like love, like compassion, like bodhicitta. So we also want to make sure that we're not just studying about, but also trying to bring those forth in meditation. And as we become more familiar with our meditation practice, we'll start to be able to understand what conditions are arising within the mind that are obstacles to our focus and to our cultivation, and what conditions and so forth are arising in the mind that we can harness in a way that are beneficial to what we're trying to develop. So and generally, Geshe-la's universal advice to beginners is, as a first step, familiarize yourself with the Lamrim literature, with the stages of the path literature. Yeah, so I just said to Geshe, maybe I should give you a few English titles. So books like From Here to Enlightenment by His Holiness, that's a really great contemporary presentation of the Lamrim. It's my personal favorite, so I always mention that. But of course, Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the path to enlightenment, challenging and profound, but you can go through it slowly. There's liberation in the palm of your hand. There's words of my perfect teacher. All of these are wonderful. So all of our study and practice is connected to the three principal aspects of the path. Renunciation, definite emergence, right? That wish to be free, that's the first. The second is bodhicitta. And the third is the correct view of emptiness. Everything goes back to those three. So Geshe said, that would be his first suggestion, but of course, lots more to share later. There's many different things we could look at.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yes, and so everybody knows how to reach me by email. So of course, if you're continuing and there's a block and you want to email Geshe a question about it, you can send it to me. Sometimes I take a little while, so my apologies, but I do always get back to people. So the thing is that we start with a simple text, like a shorter Lamrim text. That builds us a beautiful foundation, and then we add complexity and richness by looking at other texts. So one beautiful Lamrim is the Songs of Experience, the Yuntenji Gyurma by Lama Tsongkhapa. That's available for free. The Foundation of All Good Qualities. My apologies. Yuntenji Gyurma is the Foundation of All Good Qualities. This is a fantastic prayer that has all of the stages in the path, and it's only about 2 pages. So that could be a great place to begin. And once we have the Songs of Experience familiar within our mind, we have that structure within our mind, and then it becomes easier to investigate more complex things. And when we recite the Songs of Experience just once, it places a complete imprint for the entire path to enlightenment within our mind. So special. So I think, I don't see any other hands, so I think we shall end there. Thank you so much, everybody. Geshe and I will see you again in 2 weeks, but please do check out Geshe Chekawa next weekend if you have time. Take care, everyone. So Geshe said, yeah, he gets 1 week holiday, but we will be back with you the following weekend. Oh yeah, he has an engagement yeah, he does have something, but anyway, see you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you.